In the fading light of the 19th century American frontier, where dusty towns clung to life against the endless desert, and law was as thin as the paper it was written on, there emerged a boy who became more than a man. He became a legend. His name was whispered in saloons, printed in dime novels, and cursed by sheriffs across the West. Billy the Kid. A boy who grew up with nothing, who lived fast, laughed often, and killed when he had to. A gunfighter who slipped away from the noose, the bullet, and the jailhouse more times than any man had a right to. They said he cheated death 21 times, once for every year he lived. Some say it was luck, others say it was skill. Either way, his story is etched into the dust of the Wild West. A tale where fact and myth ride side by side. This is the story of the outlaw who escaped death 21 times. The legend of Billy the Kid. To understand Billy, you must first understand the world that made him. The American West in the mid to late 1800s was a land of contradictions. It was freedom and opportunity, but also violence and desperation. Railroads were carving steel paths across the plains, linking cities to frontier towns. Cattle drives stretched for hundreds of miles, rivers of longhorns flowing toward hungry markets back east. Gold, silver, and land promised riches to anyone bold enough to claim them. But beneath the promise was chaos. Lawmen were few. Justice was often served at the end of a rope or the barrel of a Colt revolver. Disputes over cattle, water, or land could spark feuds that claimed dozens of lives. And into this world, a child named Henry McCarty was born. Henry McCarty, the boy who would become Billy the Kid, entered the world sometime around 1859, though even the details of his birth are fogged in uncertainty. He was born in New York City, the son of poor Irish immigrants, but his childhood was anything but stable. His father died young. His mother, Catherine, struggled to keep the family afloat. By the early 1870s, Catherine had moved Henry and his younger brother Joseph westward, chasing opportunity in the raw new territories. They ended up in New Mexico, a place where hardship was constant and danger never far away. Catherine remarried, but her second husband offered little warmth or security. Then, when Henry was barely a teenager, tragedy struck again. His mother died of tuberculosis. Orphaned, restless, and poor, Henry drifted into petty crime. At first it was small, stealing food, clothing, anything to survive. Locals described him as polite, even charming, a boy with a quick smile and bright blue eyes. He wasn't the hulking gunslinger dime novels would later imagine. In fact, he was small and wiry, with a boyish face that made him look younger than he was. But behind the grin was a growing appetite for risk. At just 16, Henry committed his first serious crime, stealing clothes from a Chinese laundry. He was caught and thrown in jail, but he escaped easily, slipping up a chimney and disappearing into the streets. It was the first of many escapes, the beginning of a legend. From that moment, Henry McCarty ceased to be just another orphan boy. He began crafting a new identity. He would be known by many names: William Antrim, Henry Antrim, William Bonney. But history would remember him by the name he carried into infamy: Billy the Kid. The Wild West was no place for half-measures. Outlaws were born not only from theft but from blood. Billy's first confirmed killing came in 1877 in Arizona. He had fallen in with a gambler named Frank Windy Cahill, a man who bullied him relentlessly. One day, Cahill pushed too far, shoving Billy into the dirt in front of onlookers. Humiliated and enraged, the boy pulled his revolver and shot Cahill dead. It was a moment of no return. The boy outlaw had crossed the line into killer. He fled Arizona, riding hard back into New Mexico, where he would carve his reputation with both charm and gunfire. But Billy's story was not simply one of cold-blooded murder. Even his enemies admitted he could be warm, friendly, and loyal. He loved music, dancing, and laughter. In another time and place, he might have been a showman or a folk singer. Instead, he lived in a land where survival often meant drawing first. Billy's legend truly ignited in the fires of the Lincoln County War. a violent feud that tore apart the New Mexico Territory in the late 1870s. At its heart, the war was about power, money, and control. Two factions, one led by the Murphy-Dolan interests, the other by newcomers John Tunstall and Alexander McSween, fought for dominance over trade, cattle, and influence in Lincoln County. Caught in the middle were ranchers, settlers, and hired guns. Billy threw in his lot with John Tunstall, an English rancher who treated him with unusual kindness. For the first time in his life, Billy had something like loyalty to a cause. But when Tunstall was murdered in 1878 by Murphy's hired men, Billy swore vengeance. What followed was months of bloodshed. Billy joined the Regulators, a group of gunmen who fought on behalf of Tunstall's faction. Ambushes, shootouts, and executions turned Lincoln County into a war zone. Billy distinguished himself not only by his skill with a gun but by his daring. He seemed fearless, riding into danger with a grin. In one famous incident, the Regulators engaged in a shootout with Sheriff William Brady, a Murphy ally. Billy and his companions gunned the sheriff down in broad daylight, shocking the territory. To some, Billy was a hero standing against corruption. To others, he was nothing more than a ruthless outlaw. By the end of the Lincoln County War, Billy the Kid was both wanted and celebrated. Newspapers printed sensational stories of his exploits. Dime novel writers, hungry for tales of the Wild West, painted him as a cold-blooded killer who had slain 21 men, one for each year of his short life. The truth was less clear. Modern historians believe Billy killed between 4 and 9 men, but in the lawless imagination of the frontier, numbers didn't matter. Legend fed on exaggeration, and Billy fed the legend himself. He posed for photographs, wrote letters, and seemed to relish the attention. Yet with every tale of his daring escapes and deadly shootouts, the law closed in tighter. And soon, one man would step onto the stage who would define Billy's final chapter, Sheriff Pat Garrett. By 1880, Billy the Kid was one of the most wanted men in the West. The governor of New Mexico Territory, Lew Wallace, placed a bounty on his head. Posters declared him an outlaw, a menace, a killer. Yet Billy remained elusive. They said he cheated death 21 times. He slipped away from ambushes, gunfights, and posses that should have ended his story. He escaped jail more than once. Bullets missed him by inches. Enemies swore they had him, only to watch him vanish into the desert night. But fate had a way of circling back. In December of 1880, Sheriff Pat Garrett tracked Billy down near Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Garrett and his men surrounded the building where Billy and his companions were holed up. A firefight broke out. One by one, Billy's friends were shot down. Eventually, the kid was captured. It seemed finally that death had caught up with him. But for Billy the Kid, the story was never that simple. The smoke of the Lincoln County War had barely cleared, but Billy the Kid's name was already written in fire across the desert sky. By the late 1870s, the boy who had begun as a hungry drifter in the slums of New York, who had stumbled into crime in the shadow of the frontier, was now something far stranger. He was an outlaw, yes, but he was also becoming a myth. For newspapers hungry for sensation, Billy was the perfect story. Young, daring, reckless, and uncommonly hard to kill. Every gunfight, every escape, every whispered rumor of his narrow survivals added to a growing legend. It was said he could laugh in the face of death. It was said he could charm women as easily as he could outdraw hardened gunmen. It was said, half in awe, half in terror, that Billy the Kid was blessed or cursed by fate itself. But the truth was less mystical, though no less remarkable. Billy's survival was born from sharp instinct, a gambler's nerve, and sheer audacity, and nowhere were these qualities more visible than in the stories of the 21 times, so the papers claimed, that Billy the Kid escaped death. The number 21 would cling to Billy the Kid's legend forever. 21 years old at the time of his death. 21 men he was said to have killed, though the real number was probably closer to 8. And 21 escapes from death itself, as the dime novelists put it, a neat symmetry that gave his story the air of destiny. But behind the symmetry was a string of very real close calls. One of the earliest came when Billy was still in Arizona territory, before the Lincoln County War. He had quarreled with a blacksmith named Frank Windy Cahill in a saloon in Camp Grant. Cahill, a much larger man, had bullied Billy mercilessly, mocking his youth and slight build. One day, the insults turned violent. Cahill shoved Billy, then knocked him to the ground. But Billy, fast as a rattlesnake, pulled his revolver and fired. Cahill fell dead, and Billy, barely 17, mounted a horse and fled across the desert. A posse pursued him for days, and more than once Billy nearly starved, hiding in dry arroyos with nothing but the clothes on his back. He had escaped death not by luck, but by sheer endurance. Years later, in the Lincoln County War, death stalked him constantly. During one siege at McSween's house, bullets tore through walls and windows for hours. Smoke and fire engulfed the home. Men were shot down beside him one by one. Yet Billy slipped out through the flames, pistols blazing, darting like a phantom through the smoke. When dawn came, McSween lay dead, but Billy lived. The papers declared it a miracle. And time after time, Billy's instinct for survival proved uncanny. On one occasion, an enemy lay in ambush ready to gun him down as he passed through a narrow canyon. Somehow, whether by a flicker of movement or a prickle in the air, Billy sensed danger. He pulled his horse up short, wheeled around, and vanished into the hills. Later, when he returned with allies, they found tracks and shell casings in the dust. His killers had been waiting. Such stories multiplied, fed by witnesses and embellished by journalists. There was the time Billy was cornered by 3 armed men in a saloon and bluffed his way out with nothing but a smile and the suggestion of hidden reinforcements. There was the time a deputy fired point blank at him in the dark, only for the bullet to misfire. There was the time he slipped from shackles with the ease of a magician. Each narrow escape gave weight to the legend that Billy could not be killed. And whether Billy himself believed it or not, he played into the myth. "I'm not afraid to die like a man," he once told a reporter, "but I would not like to be killed like a dog." It was bravado, but it carried an edge of truth. As Billy's legend grew, so too did the determination of lawmen to bring him down. And among them was one who would become forever bound to his name, Pat Garrett. Garrett was tall, hard-featured, and ambitious. A former buffalo hunter and saloon keeper, he had drifted through the same New Mexico towns as Billy, and the two were even said to have played cards together in their younger days. But when Garrett was elected sheriff of Lincoln County in 1880, their paths diverged forever. Garrett's mission was simple: to end Billy the Kid's reign of lawlessness. The two men could not have been more different. Billy was short, wiry, full of restless energy and charm. Garrett was serious, deliberate, cautious. But they understood each other. Both were gamblers, both were survivors, both shaped by the chaos of the frontier, and perhaps that was why their confrontation became inevitable. Garrett began by striking at Billy's circle, rounding up his allies one by one. But Billy remained elusive. He knew the terrain, knew the hideouts, and had a knack for slipping away. In December of 1880, Garrett finally cornered him near Fort Sumner. A running gun battle erupted, shots ringing out across the winter desert. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Billy's companions were dead, and Billy himself was wounded and captured. At last, the kid was in irons. The newspapers proclaimed that the outlaw who had cheated death 21 times was finally finished. But Billy was not finished, not yet. Billy the Kid was brought to Mesilla, New Mexico, to stand trial for the murder of Sheriff William Brady during the Lincoln County War. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with expectation. Here was the outlaw whose name had filled headlines for years, the boy who had made sheriffs look like fools. Billy listened as witnesses recounted his crimes. He leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly, as if the entire proceeding were a joke. But when the guilty verdict was read, the smile faded. The judge pronounced the sentence: Billy the Kid was to hang until dead. The date was set for May 13, 1881. Billy, only 21 years old, was to face the gallows. He was transported under heavy guard to Lincoln, where he was confined in the old courthouse. 2 deputies watched him constantly, and his ankles were chained. The gallows were already being built outside, and yet, even here, at the edge of the noose, Billy's instinct for survival had not deserted him. On April 28, 1881, with just 2 weeks left to live, Billy the Kid pulled off the most famous jailbreak in frontier history. It began when Deputy James Bell escorted Billy across the courthouse to use the privy. As they returned, Billy somehow slipped a hand from his shackles. Some say he had obtained a smuggled pistol, others that he overpowered Bell with lightning speed. What is certain is that Billy shot Bell on the staircase, then raced upstairs to the armory. He seized a shotgun, spun it toward Deputy Robert Ollinger, who was eating lunch across the street. Ollinger heard the commotion and rushed back, only for Billy to greet him at the window. "Hello, Bob," Billy called, leveling the shotgun. "You won't be taking me back again." The blast was final. Ollinger fell dead, and Billy dashed down the stairs, freed himself from the rest of his shackles, and mounted a waiting horse. As the townsfolk watched in stunned silence, Billy galloped out of Lincoln laughing, the chain still clattering around his ankles. It was a scene made for legend, the condemned outlaw who had escaped the hangman's noose by sheer audacity. Newspapers across the country proclaimed it the boldest escape ever attempted, and once again, Billy the Kid had cheated death. But even Billy's luck could not last forever. Pat Garrett was relentless, and he knew that Billy's heart, and perhaps his weakness, lay in Fort Sumner, where friends and lovers sheltered him. On the night of July 14, 1881, Garrett received word that Billy was nearby. He and 2 deputies slipped into the Maxwell Ranch, where Billy often stayed. They waited in the darkness, tense, silent. Around midnight, Billy entered the room, carrying a knife and speaking softly in Spanish. "¿Quién es? ¿Quién es?" "Who is it? Who is it?" Before he could react, Garrett fired. The bullet struck Billy in the chest. He staggered, gasped, and fell. The boy who had cheated death 21 times, the boy who had laughed at the hangman's rope, lay still at last. He was 21 years old. News of Billy's death spread like wildfire. Some celebrated, relieved that a dangerous outlaw was gone. Others mourned, seeing in Billy not a criminal, but a symbol of rebellion against corrupt authority. And then the stories began. Some claimed Garrett had killed the wrong man, that Billy still lived. Others whispered of sightings years later, of Billy living under assumed names in Texas or Mexico. Dime novels painted him as a Robin Hood, stealing from the rich and sparing the poor. Hollywood would later cast him as a romantic gunslinger, part devil, part angel. The real Billy was far more complex, a boy driven by poverty, shaped by violence, trapped by circumstance, and carried along by his own choices. He was a thief, a killer, a survivor. But he was also witty, loyal to friends, and undeniably charismatic. In the end, perhaps it was this duality that made him a legend. The outlaw who escaped death 21 times was more than a man. He was a mirror in which America saw both its darkest violence and its restless spirit of freedom. And in that mirror, Billy the Kid will ride forever.